The people who suffer the most are often the ones nobody notices. Before the sun rose above the pine-covered hills surrounding the Silver Ridge Pack, Olivia Bennett was already awake. The small cottage she lived in sat near the edge of the territory, far from the large homes occupied by respected pack members. Cold morning air drifted through the narrow window as she tied back her light brown hair and prepared for another long day. At 24 years old, Olivia had become accustomed to silence. Not because she lacked thoughts, not because she lacked feelings. She had simply learned that speaking rarely changed anything. For months, she had carried responsibilities that should have been shared among many people. She cleaned meeting halls, organized storage rooms, prepared supplies for community events, and helped maintain the grounds surrounding the pack house. Whenever additional work appeared, it somehow found its way to Olivia. If something unpleasant needed to be done, her name was usually the first one mentioned. She never complained. Not because the situation felt fair. It did not. But every time frustration threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered the promise she had made years earlier. A promise she carried quietly in her heart. As she stepped outside, the sky was painted in shades of blue and silver. The world felt peaceful before everyone else woke up. Olivia liked those moments. The early mornings belonged to her alone. No criticism, no judgment, no whispers following her through crowded rooms. Just the sound of wind moving through trees and birds greeting a new day. She walked toward the pack house, carrying cleaning supplies in a worn canvas bag. By the time she arrived, several other workers had already gathered near the entrance. One of the supervisors immediately approached. "Olivia, the main hall needs cleaning before the council meeting." She nodded. "Of course." And after that, the storage building. Another nod. Then the guest rooms. Olivia simply smiled. "I can do that." The supervisor looked relieved. He always looked relieved when speaking to Olivia because he knew she would never argue. Nearby, two younger pack members watched the exchange. One shook his head. "She always says yes." The other laughed quietly. "That is why everyone keeps asking." Olivia heard them. She pretended not to. Inside the main hall, sunlight gradually spilled across polished wooden floors. Olivia worked carefully, dusting tables and arranging chairs for the upcoming meeting. Large portraits of former Alpha leaders hung on the walls. Their painted eyes seemed to follow her movements. She wondered what they would think if they saw how differently people treated one another now. The thought disappeared as quickly as it arrived. Dwelling on disappointment had never helped anyone. Several hours passed. By midday, she had completed 3 separate assignments. While carrying supplies toward the storage building, she noticed an elderly gardener struggling to move several heavy flower containers. Without hesitation, Olivia set down her own equipment and walked over. "May I help?" The gardener smiled gratefully. "You already have enough work. That has never stopped me before." Together, they moved the containers into place. The gardener thanked her repeatedly. Olivia simply wished him a good afternoon before continuing on her way. Small acts of kindness came naturally to her. They always had. Unfortunately, kindness was rarely returned. Later that afternoon, she entered the dining hall and discovered there were not enough meals prepared for everyone working that day. Without drawing attention to herself, Olivia quietly gave her portion to another worker who had missed breakfast. When the woman realized what had happened, she looked embarrassed. Olivia only smiled and assured her it was not a problem. In truth, she was hungry. She simply did not want anyone else to go without. As evening approached, exhaustion settled into her muscles. The day had been long. Tomorrow would probably be the same. Yet as she walked home beneath a sky glowing with orange and gold, there was still a quiet dignity in her posture. The world had given her very little reason to keep believing in people. Somehow she continued anyway. What Olivia did not know was that far beyond the borders of Silver Ridge, a powerful visitor was already traveling toward the territory. A man whose arrival would expose truths hidden for far too long. And before this story was over, the silent Omega nobody defended would become the one person an entire kingdom could no longer ignore. The next morning arrived with heavy clouds stretching across the sky, casting long shadows over Silver Ridge. Olivia woke before dawn as usual and prepared for another day that looked exactly like the one before it. At least, that was what she expected. The familiar routine helped her feel steady. She folded her blanket, tied back her hair, and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The scent of rain lingered on the wind. In the distance, the pack house stood proudly atop a gentle rise, its windows glowing with early light. As she walked toward it, she noticed unusual activity. Several vehicles were parked near the main entrance. Workers hurried back and forth carrying supplies. Even the guards appeared more alert than normal. Something important was happening. Olivia soon learned that a high-ranking visitor was expected to arrive within the next few days. Nobody seemed to know exactly who the guest was. Rumors spread quickly through the territory. Some claimed it was a wealthy alpha from a neighboring region. Others insisted it was a royal representative sent from the capital. Olivia paid little attention. Important visitors rarely changed anything for people like her. Before she could ask questions, another list of tasks appeared in her hands. By mid-morning, she had already cleaned 2 meeting rooms, organized inventory records, and helped prepare guest accommodations. Every time she finished one assignment, another seemed to appear. Yet she continued moving forward without complaint. Around noon, while carrying linens toward the guest wing, she overheard several pack members speaking nearby. She should learn to say no once in a while, one remarked. Another laughed. Why would she? Everyone knows she will do whatever people ask. The words stung more than Olivia wanted to admit. Not because they were entirely false. She did accept more responsibility than most. But they misunderstood her reasons. She did not help because she lacked courage. She helped because she remembered someone she loved. As she continued down the hallway, a memory surfaced. Years earlier, before illness had taken her mother, they had sat together on a small wooden porch watching a summer sunset. Olivia had been frustrated after being treated unfairly by classmates. She remembered asking why she should keep being kind when other people were not. Her mother had smiled sadly and squeezed her hand. Because the world already has enough people choosing bitterness, she had said. Promise me something. Olivia remembered nodding. What? Her mother's voice had been gentle. No matter what happens, do not let difficult people decide what kind of person you become. That promise had stayed with her ever since. Even now, years later, it guided nearly every choice she made. Later that afternoon, a sudden rainstorm swept across the territory. Workers rushed indoors while thunder echoed beyond the hills. Olivia noticed several boxes left outside near the storage building. If they remained there much longer, important supplies could be damaged. Without hesitation, she ran into the rain and began moving them under cover. By the time she finished, her clothes were soaked and her hands cold. A nearby supervisor watched from the doorway. You did not have to do that yourself, he said. Olivia smiled softly. Someone needed to. The man seemed surprised by her answer. Most people would have demanded recognition. Olivia simply returned to work. As evening approached, the rain finally stopped. Golden sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the wet pathways throughout the territory. The world looked fresh and clean. Olivia stood outside the pack house for a moment, enjoying the peaceful view. She felt tired. Her muscles ached. Yet there was still a quiet strength in her expression. She had survived another difficult day without allowing disappointment to harden her heart. Unknown to her, far down the winding road leading towards Silver Ridge, a black vehicle crossed the territory border. Inside sat a man whose name was known throughout the kingdom. A man who had spent years uncovering corruption, restoring justice, and protecting those who had no voice. As the vehicle continued toward the pack, his gaze remained fixed on the landscape ahead. He had come seeking answers about troubling reports. What he did not know was that the most important discovery waiting for him was not hidden inside documents or council records. It was a silent Omega whose strength had remained invisible for far too long. The visitor arrived on a clear autumn morning beneath a sky painted with pale gold sunlight. Silver Ridge had spent days preparing for the inspection. Walkways were cleaned, meeting halls polished, guest rooms arranged with careful attention. Everyone seemed eager to make a good impression. Everyone except Olivia, who was too busy working to think much about important guests. She spent the early hours organizing supplies in the storage building before moving on to the main hall. By the time the first vehicle entered the territory, she was carrying a stack of folded linens down a side corridor. Outside, pack leaders gathered near the entrance to welcome the visitor. Members of the council stood proudly in neat rows. Smiles appeared everywhere. Voices became unusually polite. The atmosphere felt almost theatrical. From the back seat of the lead vehicle, Alexander Hawthorne observed everything quietly. Unlike the stories people told about him, The Alpha King did not enjoy grand entrances. Years of leadership had taught him that the most valuable truths were often found away from prepared speeches and carefully staged appearances. While others focused on ceremonies, he paid attention to details. The condition of buildings, the mood of workers, the way ordinary people behaved when they thought nobody important was watching. As the welcoming committee began their introductions, Alexander listened politely. Yet something already felt wrong. The reports he had received before arriving described a prosperous territory where everyone was treated fairly. The smiles around him seemed genuine enough. Still, experience told him that appearances could be misleading. Throughout the morning, he toured the territory accompanied by local leaders eager to showcase their success. They pointed out renovated facilities, community programs, recent improvements. Everything looked impressive. Yet Alexander noticed something interesting. The same names appeared repeatedly whenever praise was being distributed. The same people received recognition over and over again. Meanwhile, many workers remained invisible. By early afternoon, he requested time to explore without an escort. The request surprised several officials. Nevertheless, nobody could refuse. Alexander spent the next hour walking through less visible areas of the territory. Storage buildings, service corridors, garden pathways, places important visitors rarely bothered to inspect. That was when he first saw her. Olivia stood near a loading area carrying several boxes toward the supply room. The containers looked heavier than they should have been. Two other workers walked past without offering assistance. She did not complain, did not ask for help, simply adjusted her grip and continued moving forward. Alexander slowed his pace. Something about the scene caught his attention. Not because the work itself was remarkable, because of her expression. Most people carrying that burden would appear frustrated. Olivia looked tired, certainly, yet there was still calm determination in her eyes. Moments later, she reached the storage room and noticed a younger worker struggling to organize inventory records. Without hesitation, she set aside her own responsibilities and offered assistance. The younger woman immediately looked relieved. Together they finished the task in half the expected time. Again, Olivia asked for nothing in return. Alexander watched from a distance. Curious, the rest of the afternoon presented similar observations. Wherever he went, Olivia seemed to be helping someone, assisting an elderly gardener, organizing supplies, solving small problems before they became larger ones. Yet nobody appeared to notice. Or perhaps they noticed and simply took it for granted. Late that day, Alexander entered the dining hall shortly before dinner. Most tables were already occupied. Conversations filled the room. As he observed quietly from a corner, an unexpected moment unfolded. A worker arrived late after completing an assignment and discovered there were no meals remaining. The disappointment on her face was obvious. Before anyone else reacted, Olivia quietly slid her own plate across the table. The woman protested. Olivia insisted. A few moments later, she left the hall with nothing for herself. Alexander watched the entire exchange. For the first time that day, he felt genuinely unsettled. Not because Olivia had shared her meal, because nobody around her seemed surprised. It was as though everyone expected her to sacrifice her comfort whenever necessary. As evening settled over Silver Ridge, Alexander stood alone outside the guest residence overlooking the territory. Lights glowed warmly from nearby buildings. Somewhere in the distance, Olivia was probably finishing another task assigned by someone else. He found himself thinking about her more than any official report he had reviewed since arriving. The question lingered in his mind long after sunset. Why did the kindest person in this territory seem to carry the heaviest burden? And why did nobody else appear willing to ask that same question? The following day began with a quiet tension that Olivia could not explain. The sky was clear. The air was cool. Everything appeared normal. Yet she carried the strange feeling that someone was paying attention. She dismissed the thought almost immediately. Nobody paid attention to Olivia Bennett. Not in the way that mattered. She arrived at the pack house before sunrise and began preparing the council chamber for another series of meetings connected to the royal inspection. Chairs were arranged, documents organized, refreshments prepared. As always, she worked carefully because she believed even small tasks deserved effort. By mid-morning, the territory was buzzing with activity. Local leaders followed schedules. Advisors reviewed reports. Visitors moved through the main buildings conducting evaluations. Olivia remained largely invisible within the chaos. At least that was what most people assumed. Across the territory, Alexander continued his observations. The more he watched Silver Ridge, the more inconsistencies he discovered. Official reports described a community built on fairness and cooperation. Reality looked different. Certain individuals received constant praise regardless of their contributions. Others carried responsibility without recognition. And no example illustrated that imbalance more clearly than Olivia. Throughout the morning, he witnessed 3 separate situations that left a lasting impression. First, a storage inventory error created confusion among several workers. Before supervisors could become involved, Olivia quietly organized the records and solved the issue. Nobody thanked her. Everyone simply moved on. Later, a group preparing decorations for an upcoming gathering realized they were missing supplies. Once again, Olivia found a solution. Once again, nobody acknowledged her effort. Then came the moment Alexander could not ignore. Near lunchtime, one of the women who often spoke critically about Olivia accidentally spilled an entire basket of freshly sorted materials across a corridor floor. Papers scattered everywhere. Several people nearby immediately stepped away rather than help. Olivia happened to be passing through the hallway. She stopped, looked at the mess, then calmly knelt down and began helping gather everything. The woman looked uncomfortable, embarrassed, even. "You do not have to help," she said quietly. Olivia smiled. "I know. After everything." The woman stopped speaking. Olivia simply handed her another stack of papers. Everyone has difficult days. The exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. Yet Alexander had witnessed every second from the opposite end of the corridor. What surprised him was not Olivia's kindness. He had already seen enough to know kindness defined her character. What surprised him was the complete absence of resentment. Most people eventually kept score. They remembered every slight, every unfair moment. Olivia seemed determined not to. That afternoon, Alexander requested access to personnel records. Several local officials appeared nervous but complied. Hours passed as he reviewed assignments, schedules, and work distributions. The pattern became impossible to miss. Olivia consistently carried more responsibilities than others holding similar positions. Additional duties appeared beside her name week after week. Some tasks clearly should have been divided among multiple workers. Instead, they repeatedly landed on her schedule. Alexander closed the final report and leaned back in his chair. His expression darkened, not from anger alone, from disappointment. The situation was not hidden because nobody knew. It continued because nobody cared enough to stop it. Meanwhile, Olivia spent the late afternoon helping prepare the community hall for an evening gathering. As she adjusted table settings, several pack members nearby discussed the royal visitor. "I heard he is leaving soon," one said. "Probably after finishing his inspection." Another nodded. "Good. Everyone has been acting strangely since he arrived." Olivia listened without commenting. She had never met the visitor. In truth, she barely thought about him. Her attention remained focused on finishing her work before sunset. As evening settled across Silver Ridge, golden light poured through the hall windows. Olivia stood alone arranging the final centerpiece when she noticed someone enter the room. She turned and immediately froze. The visitor from the royal delegation stood only a few feet away. Alexander regarded her quietly for a moment. Not with superiority, not with judgment, simply with curiosity. "You are still working," he observed. Olivia glanced around the nearly empty hall. "There is still work left to do." A faint smile touched his expression. "There always seems to be." The words carried more meaning than she understood. For the first time since arriving in Silver Ridge, Alexander had chosen not to observe from a distance. And as the evening sunlight illuminated the room around them, the silent Omega who believed nobody truly saw her was about to have her first real conversation with the man who had been watching everything. Olivia stood beside the long table, adjusting the final arrangement of flowers while evening sunlight painted the hall in shades of gold. The visitor's unexpected presence made her pause. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Alexander glanced around the nearly empty room before returning his attention to her. "You spend a great deal of time helping other people," he said. Olivia looked slightly confused by the observation. "Most people do. Not from what I have seen." His answer surprised her. She did not know this man, yet he spoke as though he had been paying attention for quite some time. Feeling uncertain, she focused on straightening a tablecloth. There is always work that needs to be done. Alexander studied her expression. And you always do it. Olivia smiled faintly. Usually. He folded his arms. Why? The question seemed simple, yet it stopped her completely. Throughout her life, people had told her what to do, criticized her choices, assigned responsibilities. Very few had ever asked why she made those choices in the first place. I am not sure, she admitted. Alexander remained patient. I think you know. For a moment, she looked toward the tall windows where the last light of day illuminated the distant hills. Memories surfaced again. Her mother's voice. Her promise. The countless moments when choosing kindness had been more difficult than choosing resentment. Because someone has to, she finally said. That is not a complete answer. Olivia laughed softly. You ask a lot of questions. A rare smile appeared on Alexander's face. Occupational habit. The warmth of that expression caught her off guard. He seemed different from the important officials who usually visited Silver Ridge. Less interested in appearances. More interested in people. When I was younger, Olivia said quietly, I thought kindness was something people earned. If they treated you well, you treated them well. If they treated you badly, you stopped caring. Alexander listened carefully. What changed? She lowered her eyes briefly. My mother. The answer came almost automatically. Before she passed away, she told me something I never forgot. The hall grew silent. Even the sounds from outside seemed distant. She said difficult people should never decide what kind of person I become. Alexander felt those words settle heavily in his thoughts. Olivia continued. I have not always succeeded. Some days are harder than others. But I try. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Alexander asked the question that had been lingering in his mind since arriving at Silver Ridge. Why do you stay? Olivia blinked. Stay. Here. He gestured toward the territory surrounding them. You work harder than almost everyone around you. You receive very little appreciation. Yet you remain. The question touched a place she rarely allowed others to see. She turned toward the windows again. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the grounds. Because this is home. Even now, she nodded slowly. The people here are not all bad. Alexander thought about the countless examples he had witnessed. The imbalance. The indifference. The way her generosity was constantly expected but rarely acknowledged. Some have not treated you fairly. Olivia laughed quietly. That is probably true. And yet you continue helping them. Her answer came without hesitation. Their choices belong to them. Mine belong to me. The simplicity of those words left Alexander momentarily speechless. During years of leadership, he had met influential alphas, wealthy merchants, respected advisors, and powerful politicians. Many possessed intelligence. Some possessed ambition. Very few possessed the quiet wisdom sitting before him now. At that moment, footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Several local officials entered the hall, immediately noticing the conversation. Their surprise was impossible to hide. Why was the royal visitor speaking privately with Olivia Bennet? Alexander noticed their expressions. So did Olivia. Instantly, she stepped back, uncomfortable with the attention. The officials exchanged awkward greetings before discussing schedules for the following day. Yet Alexander barely listened. His focus remained on the young Omega standing near the window. For the first time since arriving, he understood the truth. Olivia's silence was not weakness. Her patience was not surrender. Her kindness was not ignorance. She knew exactly how people treated her. She simply refused to allow their behavior to define her character. As the meeting concluded and Olivia quietly prepared to leave, Alexander watched her walk toward the doorway. A realization settled firmly in his mind. The reports he had come to investigate suddenly seemed far less important. Because hidden beneath months of neglect and misunderstanding was a woman whose strength surpassed anything he had expected to find. And for the first time, he began wondering what would happen when the rest of the kingdom finally saw what he now saw clearly. The conversation in the hall stayed with Alexander long after Olivia left. That night, while the rest of Silver Ridge settled into silence, he remained awake inside the guest residence reviewing reports spread across a large wooden table. Pages filled with schedules, assignments, and personnel records covered the surface. The more he studied them, the clearer the pattern became. Olivia's workload had increased steadily for months. Tasks assigned to 3 or 4 people often appeared under her name alone. Responsibilities were shifted toward her whenever others complained. Requests for assistance were ignored. Yet nowhere in the official records did anyone acknowledge her contributions. Alexander closed the final folder and stared out the window toward the sleeping territory. For the first time since arriving, the troubling reports that had brought him here made perfect sense. The problem was not simply poor management. It was a culture that had grown comfortable overlooking someone who deserved better. The next morning, Olivia woke before sunrise as usual. She expected another ordinary day. Instead, she found an unexpected message waiting near the entrance of the pack house. One of the assistants approached her carrying a folded note. "This was left for you." Olivia looked surprised. Very few people sent her messages. She unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was neat and direct. "Meet me at the Eastern Garden after your morning duties." Curious, she glanced at the signature. It simply read Alexander. Her heart skipped slightly. Throughout the morning, she found herself thinking about the note while completing her responsibilities. She swept pathways, organized supply inventories, and prepared meeting materials, yet her thoughts kept returning to the unusual request. Why would the visitor want to meet her again? By late morning, she finally made her way toward the Eastern Garden. The area was quiet and peaceful. Flowering shrubs lined winding stone paths. A small fountain stood near the center, surrounded by benches. Alexander was already there. He greeted her with a calm smile. "Thank you for coming." Olivia nodded politely. "You asked to see me." "I did." For a moment, he seemed to consider his next words carefully. Then he asked something nobody had ever asked before. "What would you do if your life were different?" Olivia blinked. "Different? If you were free to choose anything. Any path. Any future." She laughed softly. "That sounds like a question for someone important." "I asked you." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Olivia looked toward the fountain. Nobody had ever shown much interest in her dreams. Over time, she had stopped thinking about them. "I would help people," she answered quietly. Alexander smiled. "You already do that." "Not like I mean." She hesitated. "I would create a place where nobody feels forgotten." The answer surprised even her. The dream had existed for years, hidden beneath responsibilities and disappointments. Alexander listened carefully. "That sounds like a worthy goal." Olivia shook her head. "It is only a dream. Many important things begin that way." They spent the next hour talking. Not about work, not about duties, about books, family memories, hopes, and regrets. For the first time in a very long while, Olivia felt seen as a person rather than a responsibility. Unknown to her, Alexander was learning far more than he expected. Every answer confirmed what he already suspected. Her silence had never been weakness. Her patience had never been surrender. She possessed a rare strength built from compassion and conviction. Later that afternoon, after they parted ways, Alexander received new information from several independent investigators traveling with his delegation. Their findings confirmed months of unfair treatment hidden beneath carefully prepared reports. As he read the evidence, a quiet determination settled over him. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact, and soon, everyone in Silver Ridge would be forced to face it. Meanwhile, Olivia returned to her duties unaware that events were already moving toward a moment that would change her life forever. For months, she had endured being overlooked. For months, she had carried burdens in silence. But the season of being invisible was coming to an end. The announcement came early the next morning. Every council member, supervisor, and senior PAC representative was ordered to attend a special assembly in the main hall. The request alone created immediate speculation throughout Silver Ridge. Important gatherings were not unusual, but the timing felt different. Conversations filled every corridor. Questions spread faster than answers. Olivia learned about the meeting while organizing records near the administrative office. Like everyone else, she assumed it concerned the royal inspection. She certainly did not expect to play any role in it. Throughout the day, tensions seemed to settle over the territory. Supervisors appeared nervous. Council members held whispered discussions. Even the people who normally carried themselves with confidence seemed unusually distracted. Meanwhile, Alexander remained calm. For days he had observed, listened, investigated. Now he possessed a complete picture of what had been happening beneath the surface of Silver Ridge. More importantly, he knew exactly what needed to happen next. As evening approached, the main hall filled with people. Rows of chairs stretched across the room. PAC members gathered along the walls. Council representatives occupied seats near the front. Olivia arrived quietly and took a place near the back, hoping to remain unnoticed. The large hall buzzed with conversation until the doors opened. Instantly, silence swept through the room. Alexander entered accompanied by several members of his delegation. His presence immediately commanded attention. He moved toward the front platform and surveyed the crowd. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then he began. His voice was calm, but carried effortlessly throughout the hall. I came to Silver Ridge to evaluate reports regarding leadership, community welfare, and territory operations. Several officials nodded nervously. Alexander continued. During my visit, I observed many positive things. Hardworking people, dedicated families, individuals who genuinely care about this community. Relief briefly appeared on a few faces. Then his expression hardened slightly. I also discovered something deeply concerning. The atmosphere changed instantly. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Alexander stepped forward. A territory cannot claim to value fairness while ignoring the contributions of those who carry its greatest burdens. Several council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Olivia listened quietly, unsure where this was leading. Alexander continued. For months, responsibilities were distributed unevenly. Credit was assigned selectively. Certain individuals benefited from work performed by others. The room grew increasingly tense. One supervisor lowered his eyes toward the floor. Another shifted nervously in his chair. Then Alexander revealed the evidence. Detailed records, assignment logs, testimonies from workers, independent findings collected during the inspection. Every fact pointed toward the same conclusion. People had knowingly allowed one individual to shoulder responsibilities that should have been shared. Murmurs spread throughout the hall. Olivia sat frozen. She recognized the assignments being discussed, recognized the schedules, recognized the months being described. Slowly, realization began forming. Alexander was talking about her. Yet what happened next shocked everyone even more. One council member finally stood. Your Majesty, with respect, she never complained. The room fell silent again. Alexander's gaze settled upon the speaker. Exactly. The answer struck the hall like thunder. The fact that someone remained silent does not justify ignoring them. Nobody had a response. Alexander continued. Kindness is not permission for exploitation. Patience is not weakness. Humility is not a reason to overlook someone's value. Every word carried undeniable authority. For the first time, many people began seeing the situation through a different lens. They remembered the tasks Olivia completed, the help she offered, the sacrifices she made, the countless times she solved problems without recognition. Shame appeared on more than a few faces. Then Alexander revealed the truth nobody expected. He stepped toward the center of the platform and addressed the entire gathering. There is another matter you deserve to know. Curiosity rippled through the crowd. I did not come here merely as an inspector. Confusion spread instantly. Even local leaders looked surprised. Alexander's voice remained steady. I am Alexander Hawthorne. The room seemed to stop breathing. Shock swept across every face. Several people immediately stood. Others stared in disbelief. The realization hit them all at once. The visitor they had treated as an ordinary royal representative was not simply an official. He was the true Alpha King himself. Olivia felt her heart race. For days she had spoken with him, completely unaware of his identity. Around her, astonishment filled the hall. Yet Alexander's attention settled on only one person, the silent Omega sitting near the back. And as the crowd struggled to absorb the truth of who he really was, everyone sensed that the most important part of the evening had not happened yet. The revelation sent shockwaves through the hall. Even several council members who had worked with the royal delegation for days looked stunned. Conversations erupted in whispers before quickly fading beneath the weight of the moment. The true Alpha King stood before them, calm and unwavering, while the people of Silver Ridge struggled to process what they had just learned. Olivia remained seated near the back of the room, her heart racing. Memories from the past week flashed through her mind. The conversations in the garden, the thoughtful questions, the quiet observations. She had spoken openly with the most powerful alpha in the kingdom without ever realizing who he truly was. More surprising than his identity was the fact that he had listened to her. Really listened. Across the hall, Alexander allowed the silence to settle. He knew the truth required time. Then he spoke again. For years, leaders throughout this kingdom have told me that strength comes from authority. His voice carried effortlessly through the room. Others have claimed that strength comes from wealth, status, or influence. He slowly surveyed the crowd. They are wrong. Nobody moved. Nobody dared interrupt. The strongest people are often the ones who continue choosing kindness when they have every reason not to. His gaze drifted toward Olivia. Many people followed it. For the first time, they looked at her differently. Not as a worker, not as a burden, not as someone easily overlooked. They began seeing the person she had always been. Alexander stepped down from the platform. The movement alone created another wave of tension. One by one, people shifted aside to clear a path. The Alpha King walked directly through the center of the hall. Toward Olivia, she immediately stood, uncertain what she should do. The entire room watched. Her pulse thundered in her ears. When Alexander finally stopped in front of her, the hall felt impossibly quiet. "Olivia Bennet," he said. She swallowed nervously. "Your Majesty." A faint smile touched his face. "You spent months carrying burdens that should never have belonged to you alone." Olivia lowered her eyes. "I was only doing my part. You did far more than your part." His voice softened. "You gave kindness when others offered indifference. You gave patience when others showed little consideration. You protected your character even when nobody protected you." Emotion tightened her throat. Around them, many faces reflected growing shame. Others reflected admiration. For perhaps the first time, everyone understood exactly what Alexander had seen. He turned toward the crowd. Some people become important because of titles they inherit. His arm extended slightly toward Olivia. Others become important because of the person they choose to be every single day. The hall remained silent. Then Alexander did something nobody expected. He remained beside her instead of returning to the platform. The gesture was simple, yet its meaning was impossible to miss. The Alpha King was publicly placing himself at the side of the Omega nobody had defended. Murmurs spread throughout the room. Olivia could hardly breathe. Alexander continued speaking. "A kingdom built on fairness cannot ignore people like Olivia." His voice grew stronger. "And I will not ignore her either." The words struck the hall with enormous force. Several people lowered their heads. Others wiped at emotional eyes. The realization spread through the gathering like sunlight breaking through clouds. This was not merely a correction of an injustice. It was a declaration, a statement about what truly mattered. For years, Silver Ridge had measured value through visibility, influence, and status. Tonight, those assumptions were collapsing. Olivia looked around the room and saw expressions she had never seen before. Respect, regret, understanding. The people who had overlooked her were finally recognizing her worth. Yet what touched her most was not their reaction. It was the man standing beside her. Alexander had every reason to remain distant. Instead, he had chosen to stand with her in front of everyone. As the significance of the moment settled over the hall, something extraordinary happened. One person began applauding, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire room filled with applause. Not polite applause, genuine applause. The kind that comes from realizing a truth too important to ignore. Olivia felt tears gathering in her eyes. For so long she had wondered whether anyone truly saw her. Tonight she finally had her answer. And as the Alpha King remained beside her while the entire hall rose to its feet, everyone understood that Silver Ridge would never look at Olivia Bennet the same way again. The applause continued long after the gathering officially ended. For Olivia, the sound felt almost unreal. She stood in the center of the hall surrounded by people who suddenly seemed to see her for the first time. Yet when the crowd slowly began to disperse, she found herself focusing on only one person. Alexander remained nearby, speaking with advisors and local leaders, but every so often his gaze returned to her. Not out of obligation, not out of curiosity, out of genuine respect. In the days that followed, Silver Ridge changed in ways nobody could ignore. Work assignments were reorganized. Responsibilities were distributed fairly. Community leaders began paying closer attention to the people who had long been overlooked. More surprising than any policy change was the shift in attitude. People who once walked past Olivia without a second glance now greeted her warmly. Several offered sincere apologies. Others simply thanked her for the countless ways she had helped them over the years. Olivia accepted every apology with grace. She never demanded explanations, never sought revenge. Carrying resentment had never been her goal. What mattered most was seeing positive change take root. Meanwhile, Alexander extended his stay in the territory longer than anyone expected. Officially, there were still matters requiring his attention. Unofficially, he found himself increasingly drawn to conversations with Olivia. They spent afternoons walking through gardens, discussing books beneath old oak trees, and sharing stories about the people who had shaped their lives. The more time they spent together, the more obvious one truth became. Olivia had changed him. Before arriving in Silver Ridge, Alexander had spent years carrying the weight of an entire kingdom. Leadership often felt lonely. Every decision affected thousands of lives. Every mistake carried consequences. Yet Olivia reminded him that strength was not measured only through authority. Sometimes true strength appeared in quiet acts of kindness repeated day after day. One evening, several weeks after the assembly, Alexander invited community members to a celebration honoring those whose contributions often went unnoticed. Teachers, gardeners, caretakers, volunteers, and workers from every corner of the territory filled the hall. Olivia watched from the side of the room, smiling as people received recognition they had long deserved. Then Alexander stepped onto the platform. The room gradually became silent. "There is one final recognition I wish to make tonight," he said. Curious faces turned toward him. Alexander's expression softened. "When I first arrived here, I came searching for answers." His gaze found Olivia immediately. "Instead, I found someone who reminded me what leadership should look like." Olivia's breath caught. The room followed his attention. "I met a woman who carried burdens without complaint, offered kindness without conditions, and protected her character even when life gave her every excuse not to." Emotion filled the hall. Alexander stepped down from the platform and crossed the room. Every person watched. He stopped directly in front of Olivia. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he offered his hand. "Olivia Bennett," he said softly, yet every person could hear him. "You once told me that your dream was to create a place where nobody feels forgotten." Tears shimmered in her eyes. Alexander smiled. "I cannot imagine a better person to help shape the future of this kingdom." The room seemed to hold its breath. "And if you are willing, I would like you to stand beside me as its queen." Shock rippled through the hall. Then came silence. Complete silence. Olivia stared at him, unable to speak. Months earlier, she had been the Omega nobody defended. The woman everyone overlooked. The person expected to carry every burden quietly. Now the Alpha King stood before her, offering a future beyond anything she had ever imagined. Her answer came through tears and a trembling smile. "Yes." The hall erupted into applause once again. Yet this time the celebration felt different. It was not merely about a queen. It was about justice, about recognition, about a woman whose worth had finally been seen. As Alexander and Olivia stood together beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers, surrounded by people whose lives had changed alongside theirs, one truth became impossible to deny. The silent Omega had never needed to become someone else in order to be valued. She only needed the world to finally recognize who she had been all along.